Chris Carter here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. We're going to talk about realistic expectations for one, Russell Wilson, and two, Justin Fields, and how they need to fit into the Arthur Smith offense that the Steelers are putting together. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things on the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find this show on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of your daily Monday through Friday episodes, as well as our bonus content. We thank you for making us your first listen every day because we're your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more right now. New customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 if your bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Now, let's get into a few things here. So we took us with time to talk about the receivers yesterday, but I want to get back to some thoughts on the quarterback situation the Steelers are about to have on their hands. Now, it's still not a complete room. They are still going to add a third quarterback, whether that be a Ryan Tannehill or whether that be a rookie like Joe Milton or something like that, or Spencer Rattler. But the bottom line is we know who the top two quarterbacks are going to be on the depth chart this year. It's Russell Wilson and then Justin Fields. And it's been really fun to kind of just see the reactions across the board. There's some people who are just so ecstatic and think the Steelers, they're back, they're now Super Bowl contenders, and there's other people that are just like, did we see these two guys on their last teams? Do we really think they're going to do all that? And there's other people like me who are just kind of like, you know what? I see the upside, I see the improvement, and I see that there's potential, but let's just wait and see and how these guys will do. And there's also some people that think Russell Wilson's got it. He's going to be the leader. There's some people who think that Russell Wilson doesn't got it, and it's going to be Justin Fields by like week 2 or something like that. The opinions are flying left and right. Here's where I stand. I look at where either of these guys were in the situations that they were at that weren't favorable to them, much like Kenny Pickett's wasn't favorable to him. But I look at their talent and what they were able to put together in their rough situations, and I ask myself, how does that fit into what the Steelers are about to try to put together in their situation, and if it could be favorable to either of these quarterbacks? And again, we look at what the Steelers were asking of Kenny Pickett in the Matt Canada offense. And I mean, remember, they weren't asking a whole lot of Pickett. They were asking it hit the occasional open man. You know, there was going to be guys coming open, avoid making the big turnover, but make the big play, the occasional big play here and there. And he didn't do that enough. I think that's kind of why they went and got a Russell Wilson. And then, that was going to be the case there. He had flashes and moments, but he could never put it together for even like a complete game where he put up a lot of points. And I mean, I think that's created a bit of a thirst from Steelers fans to find just even decent quarterback play. I mean, let's be realistic. Mason Rudolph went in there and he did well. And we talked about how he did well in the show, but it wasn't like Ben Roethlisberger's like 6 touchdown games. It was just like, hey, he took the open guys. He did what he was supposed to do. And look at what happens when you do just that. I think the bar for quarterback play in the Steelers right now from a lot of fans is so low because it's just been there. Even since Ben's last years, you think back to 2021 and then 2020, it's just like, man, if you could just have a quarterback who could just make an extra play or two here and there, and then also just not be the guy that kills you, you're in a really great spot because this team has so many other good things going for it. And I think that that's where the expectations for Russell Wilson and Justin Fields are going to be at. It's not going to be whether or not Russell Wilson can go out there and sling it back and forth with Joe Burrow when they play the Bengals, or Lamar Jackson when they play the Ravens, or Josh Allen when they play the Bills, or even Patrick Mahomes because they're going to play the Chiefs next year. It's not about that. It's not about doing that. It's going to be like, hey, can you keep this team on pace? Can you go out there and make the smart decisions that are going to keep a drive alive, avoid the big mistakes, and take the open play when the defense is just not in the perfect spot, because that's going to happen more often than you think. In today's NFL, with the way that quarterbacks work, I mean, Brock Purdy, that's what he does so well, is that he is on time, he is well coached, he listens to his coaches, and he sticks to their scheme. And if they can get either or both of Russell Wilson and Justin Fields to just do that part of the offense. I'm not talking about, running around making three guys miss and throwing a bomb, 50 yards downfield. I'm talking about just taking the most traditional reads and then, occasionally make an extra play when you see it there. And we know Russell Wilson can do that because he can be athletic enough to make moves there. We know Justin Fields definitely could do that with the speed that he has, and the athleticism that he has. So, you look at those capabilities, the Steelers aren't going to be asking these guys to do much other than that. And that's where I think that the conversation sometimes gets a little bit lost because the people are like, well, are they going to be like this? Are they going to be like that? And like, man, like, I don't know if y'all get the idea of what they're going for here, but they're very much going for a person who sets the pace. And here's the thing, a person who does that can still have good numbers. Like, you look at Russell Wilson's numbers last year. People keep, there's some people that want to downplay his success, but I mean, 26 touchdowns and 8 interceptions, you would take that in a heartbeat for any of the past 2 Steelers seasons without Ben Roethlisberger, maybe even the third season, though his touchdown interception ratio wasn't terrible his last season in the NFL. But still, you take those options, especially with the deep passing numbers that Russell Wilson brings. Now, Justin Fields, you wouldn't take his numbers, but I think you take his potential with 16 touchdowns and 9 interceptions. So I look at that and I say, man, like, okay, if you take that and slap it into the Steelers offense, what would that look? And now here's the question. You're probably thinking like, well, wait a minute, Chris, we don't know what that would look like because this is going to be a whole new offense. This isn't Matt Canada's offense. Thank goodness. This is going to be Arthur Smith's offense. So how do we know what that would look like? Well, let's go look at Ryan Tannehill, the 2 years that he was with Arthur Smith and the Tennessee Titans. Now, Tannehill, if you remember, came in. That's the unique thing about Tannehill is that when he came to the Titans, he came there after being a first-round pick by the Dolphins that didn't work out, and then he came in the middle of the year, started 10 games, went 7-3, but in those 10 games, 2,700 passing yards, 22 touchdowns, 6 interceptions, a very good rate there if you look at that. And then the very next year, his only full year that he had with Arthur Smith, went 11-5, 33 touchdowns, 7 interceptions, 3,800 plus yards that season. Like, to me, I don't know about you, but like, that's a pretty good ratio to have there. And if you go back and you look at those games, Ryan Tannehill wasn't being amazing in those spots to get those numbers. He was taking what was there. He was working with an offense that was leaning on Derrick Henry and was leaning on more of a balanced look to go and beat teams the way the Steelers, I think, are trying to be right now. And whereas Najee Harris isn't Derrick Henry, him and Jaylen Warren, though, make for a dynamic duo of a pair, and with their offensive line that I think is still not even close to being done, added onto, and we'll talk about that in a minute. I think that they can be an offensive line that creates the space to win more like that. And again, and I'll even go back, like you go back to that first year with Ryan Tannehill, you're like, okay, 22 touchdowns, 6 interceptions in 10 games. If you took that out and stretched that out to a full 16 game season, what that would come out to be, it would come out to be about 35 touchdowns if he played 16 games that year, and it'd be 17 games now. So like, Ryan Tannehill in his 2 years with Arthur Smith was pretty good. And if Arthur Smith can get that out of either Russell Wilson or Justin Fields with this team as it's constructed right now, they're a whole different problem to deal with. Not just because they're scoring, but because they're possessing the ball, because they're holding on to it, because they're forcing defenses to have to do more things to stop them. That's what this offense is going to be. And it's not going to be because they're superstars. It's going to be because they're sticking to the game plan. They're doing what they're coached to be doing, and they're making the traditional reads and throws in there. And that was the thing that Kenny Pickett was struggling with last year. And again, yes, to be fair to Kenny Pickett, there was a lot of things to struggle with last year when there was so much disorganization with Matt Canada's system. But that's going to be gone now. And now you got a veteran in Russell Wilson who's done it and shown he could do it. A guy in Justin Fields who's looking to prove it, but has the tools and has the athleticism. I look at that, and if you're sitting around here making guesses as far as how good or great they're going to be, I still say sit back and watch. But I think that's what you're going to expect there. I'd even say upwards in the anywhere between 25 to 30 touchdowns isn't completely unreasonable to ask from Russell Wilson this upcoming year in this offense. And if it ends up being Justin Fields, I actually think it's a kind of a similar thing. Now, he might mix that up more because he'd have his legs and he'd be using them, and maybe he would do that. But yeah, I look at the Steelers quarterback situation right now, and I'm not saying they're out here, they're going to be competing with the best of them. Like, you can still look around and say, you know what, Lamar Jackson and Joe Burrow by themselves, still better quarterbacks. But the Steelers don't need the superstar quarterback. They need the well-coached, they need the coachable, they need the quarterback that's going to take the play that's there and keep the team on task, and let the defense that still is probably going to finish in the top 10 in scoring this next year actually be able to capitalize more on how well they play in games. But to keep this team heading in the right direction, we have to ask ourselves, what is going to be the draft priority of this team with the current state of the free agency moves that they've made? We'll do that next here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. But first, I want to remind you this show is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the number one sportsbook in America. Say goodbye to the busted brackets, because FanDuel lets you bet on every game of the tournament. Whether you're betting on a big upset or on a 1 seed, it's time to go dancing on America's number one sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $200 back in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. That's $200 to use on point spreads, money lines, and you can even pick who's going to win it all. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon, and you can start betting on college hoops until they cut down the nets. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon for new customers to get $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Only on FanDuel, America's number one sportsbook. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter. We continue our venture into this good discussion. Now, I want to switch the topic here from quarterback to looking at the build that the Steelers have here. Now, we look at the Steelers, and it's interesting to see episode to episode. We're exploring all the different options that they have, but everyone has a favorite thing that they want to get in this draft. Like, when I'm talking about everyone, I mean fans, like people who listen to the show, talk to me, like they want a receiver, they want a corner, they want a tackle, they want a center, they want a defensive lineman. But you look at all those different things. So we want, you look at all those different things and the different areas of investment that they're going to take, and it makes you ask yourself, what should be the Steelers' priority going into the early rounds of this draft class? Should it be getting a guy that's going to boost the trenches, or should it be a guy that's going to boost the skill players unit? Or should they just wait and see who's the best player available? That's the real answer right there. But let's talk about the possibilities of either direction ending up being the direction that the Steelers go in. Let's look at the skill players for a second here. Let's say the Steelers get a corner and a receiver in round 1 and round 2, and let's say you get Cooper DeJean and Roman Wilson, two guys I really like and think would be awesome fits for what they're trying to do. You'd feel great about that. Cooper DeJean with Joey Porter Jr. and Minka Fitzpatrick and Deshaun Elliott and Devontae KZ. Sign me up. That's a guy that you could actually put in there, and Dante Jackson will also be there. There's so many things that add up about that. Then you add in a Roman Wilson. All of a sudden, let's say they sign Tyler Boyd. Roman Wilson, Tyler Boyd, George Pickens, Calvin Austin, Van Jefferson. That's a nice 5 right there. I'm all for that. And you're thinking like, man, the corners are going to be set. Secondary is going to be set. You got playmakers at the wide receiver position. What's going to stop this team? And then you think, wait a second. Who's playing center? And that's where I think the Steelers are going to run into a bit of a hill here if they don't handle the trenches early in this draft too, because they could also end up drafting 2 guys in the on the offensive line and end up missing out on some skill players. But I look at the opportunity here, and I'm thinking like, man, like if they can manage to solidify the offensive line, wouldn't that fit more in line with what Arthur Smith as an offensive coordinator is trying to set up? A dominant team at the line of scrimmage that can pound you with the football and then afterwards punish you with the passing game when you're all over the place. That's why I think the Steelers are trying to get to. And that's kind of what Alan talked about yesterday on the show when we had him, Alan Saunders from SteelersNow.com. When we were talking about the options here, he brought up we're talking about getting third and fourth receivers here, but how many times are those guys going to get targeted in Arthur Smith's offense? And that's a great question because I don't think they're going to get targeted a whole lot. I don't think they're going to see the field a whole lot. I think they're going to run a lot more double tight end, maybe even more double running back sets, and you're going to see them find more creative ways to get the ball in the hands of different guys who are really talented. And that's not to say that the Steelers shouldn't try to keep re-upping the wide receiver room. If they could go get a guy that fits there, that's awesome. But wouldn't you prefer, with the current state of the Steelers, to make sure that you have a center who's going to be that guy at the center, and then also find a tackle who can let Broderick Jones go to left and be on the right side and be strong and tough, and then that becomes your tone setter for how everything plays out. And if you do those things, I feel like when we're talking about all the expectations, all the priorities, what they should, what they shouldn't do, this team still needs a center. We talked about that on yesterday's podcast as well. But even if they get a center, they still need another tackle so that Broderick Jones can move to left, and if Dan Moore doesn't have to play right. That's where I think the Steelers team is right now, is that, listen, and they could also mix it up, right? They could get a tackle in the first, corner in the second, a center in the third, and then, whatever. Like you get my point there. They can easily mix this up a little bit. But I look at how this team is probably going to want to win. And part of this also, we need to see what these guys are like. But I look at how they're going to want to win with Arthur Smith, how they're going to want to run the ball to set up the pass. And then also, when they're throwing the ball like that, you go back and you think about the Titans receiver situations in those years, and you're wondering, like, okay, well, did they have a litany of wide receivers that were just going off that year? Well, if you go back and you look, they had AJ Brown, pretty doggone good. But after him, Corey Davis, a high pick, but Then after him, Adam Humphries, Khalif Raymond. Those are the receivers that you're starting to get there after the top two guys. And really, AJ Brown's the only one that kind of makes you say, ooh. I think that's why it makes a lot more sense for the Steelers to go for the trench guys over the skill guys. Now, again, corner's a whole different ball game. If you can get a top flight corner, go get a top flight corner. But like, let's say in the second round, and you have a chance to choose. Do you want a center? Do you want a tackle? Or do you want a receiver? Unless the receiver is just that good and they are that much higher up on your big board that you have to take that talent. I'm sorry. I'm looking at trenches in those situations, especially for where the Steelers are right now. If the Steelers trenches were set, if the offensive line was dominant and we knew what that was going to be, I would think differently. But they don't, and they're close to it, but they want to complete it. And you got to be able to do that. You have to be able to get center right. You have to be able to get someone in the place of Dan Moore, and keep Broderick Jones on the field, which means most likely moving him back to left tackle. So again, I'm not saying, when I'm comparing to the Titans, I'm not saying everything was hunky-dory for the Titans, because that team didn't win a Super Bowl either. But I think that there's space to see what kind of an offense could make the Steelers a better team next year. I mean, let's not forget that in that year, the Titans had the number two in 2020, specifically the one full year that he had, that Arthur Smith had Ryan Tannehill and everything else going on for them. They had the number 4 scoring offense, the number 2 offense in yards. They had the 8th most passing touchdowns in the NFL, and the second fewest interceptions. Like that. If that's the guy, if that's the Russell Wilson version that you get in this situation, the Steelers, with the way that they play, the way that they've had to win, scraping by with just their defense and hanging in there, I think that does make the Steelers a bit more of a contender. But again, it goes back to looking at the trenches versus the skills, and looking at, do you want to get the lineman? Do you want to get the receiver slash corner? What's more important, and what's more important to the new quarterback that you're bringing in? Those are all legitimate questions. I want to talk about how that plays into the team identity. We'll do so right after this here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. But first, I want to remind you, this episode is brought to you by BetterHelp Therapy Online. What's the first thing that you do if you had an extra hour in your day? Maybe you go for a run. Maybe you'd read a book. Or maybe you just be there for a friend. But what about being there for yourself? That's where therapy can come in, because therapy can help you find what matters most to you so that you could do more of it. I personally benefited from the help of a good therapist in my life who's helped me sort out the most important things that I try to balance out every single day. And if you're thinking of starting therapy, that's why it's such a great time to give BetterHelp a try. BetterHelp knows life can be busy and stressful, and it's designed to be suitable to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Learn to make time for what makes you happy with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter. Let's talk about that team identity thing that I'm talking about there, because a lot of people, I think, sometimes hear me say that and they kind of go like, but I don't want a team like that. I want a team that throws the ball over the yard. I don't want to do that, have to win this way. And I hear that. I hear that you want to get there, but this is the way that the Steelers are constructed right now until they get that superstar quarterback. And understand, like, this way does make you competitive if you do the right things. Look at what the Niners did. They got to the Super Bowl again. And they haven't had plus tier quarterback play. They've had solid. Jimmy Garoppolo was solid. Brock Purdy is solid. And if the Steelers can go find that guy, or if Justin Fields turns out to be that guy, great. Cross that bridge when you get there. But as I've said before, and I've said this for the past 2-3 years, and I said the change is coming. The pendulum is swinging in the NFL, where defenses have reacted to the passing offense of the NFL, and they've gotten smaller linebackers and nickelbacks and quicker players who can cover more ground. And in doing so, they've lost the they've lost the sizable linebackers, the bigger guys who are downhill stuffers who can get after the running game and take that game away. I think that's where the Steelers are headed, to trying to have an offense that can counter those types of defenses, because that's where a lot of defenses are because they're all trying to get ready to take on the next superstar quarterback. But I think that what the Steelers are trying to do, one, they need the offensive line to be fixed. They need to have a center and a tackle added to this roster before training camp, and good ones, not, with good draft picks, not like, guys that you just called up at the last second. But I look at that and I think that this identity, it can and maybe even will work for the Steelers and how they want to build. Because again, like, we were talking about all the different options here. Like I've been talking with some fans who they want the Steelers to trade for Brandon Ayuk, and not that I wouldn't say no to Brandon Ayuk, because he's a heck of a receiver, a really good route runner, and then he would take the place kind of Deontay Johnson. But my only thing is, if you have to give a first round pick to do that, not this year. Nope. There's going to be top tier tackles, top tier corners, and top tier receivers coming. So if I look at that, I'm thinking like, man, like this, it makes a lot of sense right now to try to hold on to that pick and use it to invest in the trenches and keep building that identity. The Steelers don't have a dominant offensive line yet. They showed flashes of it, again, in the last 10 games of the season, one of the best rushing offenses in the NFL. But now they know what it takes to be like that, and they're going to be getting new pieces probably. So I look at the Steelers' options here, and I see, some people think, like, there's people who also say trade for Justin Jefferson, and I'm just like, buddy, everyone wants to trade for Justin Jefferson right now. And if they pull it off, I don't even know what I'm going to do. Like, is there a poll for things? I can't take tequila shots on air. I don't know what I'd do if Omar Khan pulled off Justin Jefferson. Not because of excitement, just being like, okay, sir, you are doing way too much. you know what I have to do? I have to do an episode about saying that they would never get Justin Jefferson. Then Omar Khan would just have his spider sense of knowing when can I drop a move that would worse mess up Chris's podcasting and force him to do an emergency episode. So that's what I have to do. I have to say the Steelers would never draft Justin Jefferson or never trade for Justin Jefferson. I'm not going to say it, though. I'm going to save it. I'm going to save it to say it on another time. But point being, I don't think I don't think the Steelers should lock themselves into any positions. I'm not saying that, like, if Joe Olufashanu, Talisa Fuaga, Marius Mims, J.C. Latham, if all those guys are off the board, and the Steelers should go get a tackle still, or if they should overdraft their Jackson Powers Johnson. I'm not saying go that route, but I am saying that, like, if you're sitting there with a chance to get either one, and they're both of equal value in your mind, like if you get a top flight corner or a top flight tackle right now, I think the top flight tackle helps a bit more. I also think that the Steelers could be interesting at corner with Joey Porter Jr. and Dante Jackson, and they still need another piece, but I think a slot piece might make a lot of sense. Mike Sanders of Michigan, I think, could be a guy that could fit in there, and maybe he gets to be a later round pick, but when I say later, I mean like third round. But I do think that there are legitimate options for the Steelers in all the different directions. It's just that right now, this identity that they're still putting together, still forming, it's still a work in progress. But it's an identity that I think that can win a lot of football games. And heck, it has been winning a lot of football games with a discombobulated offense with a quarterback that's not here anymore. I think that the Steelers are in a good situation right now to continue to build in that direction. And again, you look back at the Chiefs and how they were building before they got Patrick Mahomes. I just think right now it makes a lot of sense to try to get those trenches up, get the offensive line ready to go. And then also you can invest in the defensive line if you want to. But when that first line of scrimmage, it's going to change a lot. And you win that consistently. You give your quarterback space, whether it's Russell Wilson or Justin Fields, whoever. It's going to allow your offense to flow a lot smoother, and that's where, again, the pressure isn't on the quarterbacks as much as it is, other guys to get their jobs done. But all that being said, that's just why I think that right now, unless something else happens, I feel like the Steelers are going to be big buyers on the offensive line market in the first round of the NFL draft. And I think that it's going to be really interesting to see who falls to them and who makes them make different decisions. But we'll keep exploring that as we keep going forward in the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Carter Critiques. Read my work at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, post-gazette.com for all that written work there. And also find me here every Monday through Friday on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of your daily Monday through Friday episodes as well as our bonus content. We thank you for making us yours first listen every day because we're your team every day. See you again Friday here on the Locked On Steelers podcast.